It's early in my anchor career. The floor director counts me down with his fingers. 3, 2, the red light comes on, and the first thing out of my mouth is not my voice. It is Peter Jennings.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. There was an important legal decision made.
Or my impression of him. I had a working theory in my head about what an authoritative news anchor sounded like, and the theory was Peter Jennings. If you remember, if you ever saw him, stoic, confident, never ruffled. It was the kind of voice that could narrate a hurricane and leave you somehow steadier than you were just a minute ago. I lasted about 3 seconds, and I realized there's no way I can sustain this. But there's no graceful way out of a newscast in progress. This is live television. The prompter doesn't stop. The director in your ear doesn't stop. And so I just kept going, trying to hit this target I had no business aiming at in a studio that had quietly changed shape on me the moment the red light came on. Same lights, same camera, same rundown. I had walked through 20 minutes earlier in rehearsal, but the version of me trying to be Peter Jennings was reading that studio as a much harder room than the version of me in rehearsal had read it. The prompter felt faster, the pauses felt longer and more dangerous. Every word came out about a half step slow because some part of me was checking each one on the way out the door to see, would Peter Jennings have said it that way? I'm Dale Dixon, and this is the Presence Lab. Here's what nobody told me, and what I had to figure out the hard way over more nights than I would care to count at that anchor desk. The version of me trying to be Peter Jennings was the thing making that studio steeper, bigger. Not the camera, it wasn't the audience at home, it was not the size of the broadcast. It was all me. The pack I had loaded with someone else's voice before I ever sat down in that chair. And most leaders walk into rooms carrying their own version of the Jennings voice, some version of who they think they're supposed to be when the lights come on. It's the CEO voice, it's the boardroom voice, it's the respected author voice, it's that unflappable founder voice. It almost is always borrowed, almost always heavier than the real one, and almost always part of what's making the room feel steeper, larger than it actually is. So today we're going to take that whole problem apart. The research underneath it is older and stranger than most people realize. The mechanism is sitting under every high-stakes conversation you're going to have this week. And the 4 tools at the end are the ones I wish someone had handed me at the anchor desk 30 years ago, instead of letting me figure them out one bad newscast at a time. I have built a 1-page companion for this episode called The Hill. It's going to be 4 moves with an audit and a 1-week tracker. It's free. It's 1 page, and it lives at daledixon.com/podcast. daledixon.me/podcast. I'm going to mention it again at the end. You'll see it in the show notes as well, so just stay with me. So the first response when something isn't working at that anchor desk is to work harder at the thing that isn't working. And that's exactly what I did. I figured I needed more polish, more gravity, more Peter Jennings. I went home that night and I watched tape of him, watched his newscast, looking for the trick that I was missing. The next night, I went back to the desk and I did the same thing, slightly more determined to nail the impression. It got worse. That's not a coincidence. The harder we push on the false self, the more weight we load on the pack. And the more weight on the pack, the heavier the room. By the 3rd or 4th night, I'm exhausted before the red light even comes on. I'm preparing for what feels like a much bigger room than that room actually was. If you've ever walked into a meeting more tired than you should be, given the size of the meeting, this is part of why. You weren't just doing the meeting, you were carrying a version of yourself into the meeting that was costing you most of your energy before anyone said hello. What eventually broke the spell was not a course or a coach. It was a single comment between newscasts from someone I respected. He'd been watching me for a few nights, and he didn't make a speech about it. He just said, you don't have to be him. You just have to tell people what's going on tonight. That was it. I should have known it. I would have told anyone else that gently, but hearing it about myself from someone whose opinion actually mattered was the threshold that I needed to cross. So the next night, I sat down at the desk and I made a deal with myself. I'm going to read this newscast the way I would tell my brother what's happening if he were just sitting across the kitchen table. That's it. No pushing the voice, no chasing the affect. Tell one person at home what they need to know about today. Now, I would love to tell you that the studio went back to this gentle hill that very night. It didn't, but something did happen, and it's more useful than the easy ending. The pack got lighter. The voice came easier. The prompter actually slowed down to the pace I'd walked through it in rehearsal. The studio still felt big, but it felt like a room I was working inside, not a room I was performing for. And here's the part of the story that I didn't know at the time that I want you to have now, because it explains everything I went through and probably some version of what you are going through. There's a researcher at the University of Virginia named Dennis Proffitt. He has spent decades on a question that sounds boring for about 10 seconds and then gets really interesting. He studies how human beings actually see the physical world, not what's there, what we report seeing. One of his most cited studies with his colleague Mukul Bala did something almost embarrassingly simple. They took people to the bottom of a hill and asked them to estimate how steep it was. The hill was about 5 degrees, just a gentle slope, the kind that you would walk up without noticing. When the researchers asked people to eyeball it, they guessed 20 degrees. When they had them set a tilt board with their hands, they came in around 30. The hill was 5 degrees. People were seeing it as 20 or 30. They weren't slightly off. They were off by a factor of 4 or 5. Then Proffitt and his team ran the variations, and that's where it gets useful for us. They put heavy backpacks on people before they estimated the hill. The hill looked steeper. They had people estimate at the end of a long, tiring day. Steeper. They tested older adults. Steeper. They tested people in low blood sugar states. Steeper. Every time the body had fewer resources to spend, the same gentle slope reported back to the brain as a bigger climb. So Steve Magnus, in his book Do Hard Things, puts the underlying idea this way. People perceive the environment in terms of the costs of acting within it. Sit with that. People estimate the environment at the costs of acting within it. Your perception of the room that you're walking into is not an objective read on the room. It's your nervous system's estimate of how much it's going to cost you to perform in there, given what you've got left. Walk in fresh and rested, the room is going to read more honestly. If you walk in tired, hungry, activated, or carrying a fictional version of yourself, remember Peter Jennings? That room reads bigger. Same room, different cost estimate. There's one more piece of Proffitt's work that almost nobody talks about, and I keep coming back to it. In a study that he ran with Simone Schnall and a few colleagues, people estimated the hill while standing next to someone else. Not talking, just standing next to. If the other person was a friend, the hill looked less steep. The longer the friendship, the bigger the effect. In a follow-up, even imagining a supportive person brought the perceived slope down. The hill responds to the resources you have on hand, including the human ones. That's not a feel-good observation. That's a measured effect on geometry. I call this finding your mom in the audience. If you've read my book, Sweating Bullets, you know Mac. He's a chief operations officer. He's capable, he's experienced, he's respected. He's spoken in plenty of rooms. He walks up to the lectern at the Economic Forum knowing his material cold, and his body does what bodies do. His chest tightens, his breathing pulls high, his hands grip the lectern like it might leave without him. And the piece of Mac's story I keep coming back to is this. His calendar said speech. His nervous system said public exposure. His brain had logged the moment as routine. His body had logged it as a referendum on whether he belonged. Two very different appraisals running in the same person at the same time. The one in his body won because the one in his body always wins. His material didn't disappear because he was unqualified. His access to his material changed because his physiological state changed. When his body priced the moment as a threat, everything inside the moment got more expensive. He looked at the room different. So looking at the audience, pausing after a point, letting silence sit, saying one clear sentence without trying to bury it inside three qualifiers, Mac was the leader at the lectern. I was the kid at the anchor desk. Different rooms, same exact mechanism. So let me put that mechanism inside two rooms you've actually been in. Room number one, you're walking into a board meeting where the agenda is the same agenda you've run 6 times. The same board members, the same long table, the same chair you've sat in since the second quarter of 2023. But last night, you slept for 5 hours. You flew in from somewhere, you skipped breakfast because the hotel restaurant was packed, and you didn't want to wait. And as you walk in, this room feels heavier. 2 of the board members look more skeptical than they probably are. The questions in your head are sharper than the questions in the actual room. You over-prepare your opening, you over-explain your first slide, and then talk a little too fast through the middle. The room didn't change, your pack did. Now, room 2, smaller stakes, just as expensive. It's a one-on-one with someone who reports to you. You've had 100 of these, but this one, you're going to give them a piece of feedback they're probably not going to like. So you walk into the conference room 10 minutes early. The chairs look closer together than usual. The clock on the wall sounds louder than you remember. You rehearse the opening sentence 3 times in your head. Then you rehearse it differently. Then you wonder if maybe you should soften it. And then the person walks in, and you sound like a stranger to yourself for the first 30 seconds. The conversation didn't get harder. The cost of saying the true thing went up. There's a social psychologist named Jim Blaskovich, who ran a lab at UC Santa Barbara for years, who built the foundational work on what he called challenge versus threat states. The summary is simpler than it sounds. Your brain runs a fast, mostly unconscious appraisal whenever you walk into something that matters. It compares the demands of the moment with the resources you believe you have. Resources exceed demands, you go into a challenge state. Your heart rate's up, your blood is flowing where it needs to go, full access to your own material. When, on the flip side, demands exceed resources, you go into a threat state. The heart rate is also up, but the blood vessels constrict, the attention narrows, and access to your own material starts to degrade. Same external event, different physiology, different perception, and much different performance. This is also, by the way, why just calm down is such bad advice. The body is doing exactly what bodies are supposed to do when the math says demands exceed resources. You can't argue with the math. You can only change the inputs. There's one more part of my story before we get to the tools, and it's the part that crystallized everything else. A few weeks into the deal that I'd made with myself, breaking news hit during my shift, and I'm not going to get into specifics. It was the kind of story where You cannot be polished because the story is too big and too raw for polish, and the audience does not want polish. They want a human who knows what's going on. The teleprompter was absolutely useless because the scripts were being rewritten on the fly. I had a half page of notes from the producer in my earpiece and a phone line patched to a reporter in the field. This was a while ago. So for 40 minutes, there was no version of Peter Jennings that I could pretend to be. There was only Dale in a chair telling people what we knew and didn't know and asking the right questions when we did not have the answers. When the broadcast ended, I sat in the studio for a minute. The lights were still up, and I realized something that I had been chasing for months had just happened by accident. The studio wasn't steeper than it had been at rehearsal. It was the same studio. The pack was lighter because there was no room in my head for an extra voice. The gauge had come back to honest because the situation had stripped the Peter Jennings impression away by force. That night was the death of something. It was also the start of the work that I'm doing with you right now. Here's what I came back from that desk with. 4 moves. Each one is small. Each one is a repetition. None of them require you to be calm. They require you to be accurate. They are the spine of the Hill card that you can download off the website. And they are the tools that I wish someone had handed a younger version of me before he ever sat down in that anchor chair. So move number 1 is name the actual hill. This one runs the night before or 60 minutes before. And the move is to describe the moment in facts in one sentence with no adjectives. Not a brutal board meeting where I'm probably going to get hammered. That's a story we are telling ourselves. The fact version is 15 minutes to present the recommendation and ask for approval. That's the cold, hard facts. If you can't compress your moment that tight, you're carrying narrative weight into the room. And that weight is going on your pack, whether you noticed packing it or not. Ask yourself, what is this meeting without the adjectives? Move number 2, identify the pack. This run probably runs 10 minutes before you actually go into the meeting. The move is to list what is carrying that does not belong. So you're going to list what you're carrying that does not belong in that pack that you're taking into the meeting. It could be last night's sleep, the argument you didn't finish, the email from someone that's still sitting in your stomach, the need to sound brilliant rather than useful. It's the Jennings voice in your head, whatever your version of it is. You're not going to put all of it down. If you're tired, you're tired. But naming the pack cuts its weight roughly in half because the parts you were carrying unconsciously have to be carried consciously now. And consciousness is heavier on the load than on you. So you ask yourself, what am I carrying that is not the room's fault? This is where Prophet's social support finding earns its keep. The friend who's standing next to you. If you can call one person you trust before the meeting, even for just 2 minutes, that room is going to read lighter when you walk in. Not because you feel better, but because the hill itself gets less steep. Move number 3. Lower the cost. This one runs at the threshold, the wings, the hallway, the chair before the call starts. The move is to ask which specific action feels expensive. Pressure does not attach itself evenly to every part of the meeting. It usually attaches to 1 or 2 specific moves. For some leaders, it's starting. For others, it's the pause after their recommendation. For others, it's the moment they have to say, I don't know yet. For others, it's holding the line on a clear no. Find the expensive move, then pre-write a sentence that brings the cost down. If silence feels expensive, plan a deliberate 2-second pause after your recommendation. Just enough space that the room knows you're not afraid of the point. If a tough question feels expensive, pre-build a bridge sentence, something like, that's a fair concern. Let me separate two issues. A bridge sentence gives your brain somewhere to land before it starts searching for the answer. And the search goes better when it doesn't start in free fall. So you ask yourself, which move is this room making me pay full retail for? Then move 4. Prime the first move. Not the whole meeting, not full composure. Composure is the wrong target because it disappears the moment a board member, gives you the frown at your second slide. Prime one move, and it's a physical move. It could be a verbal move or a relational move. The physical move is one full exhale through your nose, longer than the previous inhale. The exhale is the vagal break. It's the cheapest, fastest down regulation tool that your body comes with. The verbal move is the first sentence. Memorize it for entry, not for delivery. You don't need a whole speech in your head. You need a clean first line so the runway is paved. The relational move is one face. Pick one person in the room whose expression is neutral or kind. I call this finding mom in the audience. Remembering that the people there truly want to see you win. If they don't, they are neurotic, psychotic, and they don't count. Anybody who wants to see you lose in a high-stakes situation is not your friend, and we count them out. So we're not looking for the toughest face in the crowd because it's really easy to get fixated there. We're not looking for the friendliest. We're looking for the neutral to kind. So you're going to speak the first sentence to that person and only to that person. The room is going to shrink back to the size of one face, and that one face will pull your gauge back toward honest. This is read the audience from Sweating Bullets, compressed into a single rep. Tell yourself, I don't need composure, I need the first move. Let me come back to the anchor desk one more time, because the callback is the whole point. After the breaking news night, the next ordinary newscast, I'll tell you, it felt different. The lights were the same, the prompter was the same, the chair was exactly the same, but I did not walk in thinking I had to be Peter Jennings. I walked in thinking I had to tell one person at home what was going on today. The studio was a gentle slope. It had been the whole time. I just hadn't been reading it accurately. And that's the move. You're not going up against a 30-degree hill in the next meeting. You are walking into a room that's been a gentle slope for years, and your job is to make sure your gauge is honest when you walk in so you can read what's actually there. You're walking into your version of that studio. This could be happening next week. It could be happening Monday morning, maybe later this afternoon, whenever you're listening to this. The room is almost certainly a gentle slope. The version of you trying to be a different version of you is almost certainly part of what's making it look steeper. Your job is not to scale a 30-degree hill. Your job is to put down the pack and read the gauge honestly. Name the hill, identify the pack, lower the cost, prime the first move. Those 4 steps. If you want all 4 on one page with the audit and a 7-day tracker, grab the Hill card. It's at daledixon.me/podcast. One page, one URL. It's free. If this episode resonated, the most useful thing you can do is send it to one leader who needs it. Just find the right person and forward it. That's how serious work travels. And I am incredibly grateful if you will give it a 5-star rating in your podcast app and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I'm Dale Dixon. The room is rarely as steep as it looks. The next one starts at the gauge. We're going to see you in the next room.